The clatter of a silver fork on a porcelain plate was the only sound. It echoed in a sudden, dead silence that felt louder than a scream. My mother, Anne, a woman whose pride was her family's public image, glared at me from across the polished mahogany table. Her voice trembled with a carefully controlled rage. "A government consultant? Is that the best you can do? No husband, no career we can actually talk about. For once in your life, explain yourself, Maya." Every eye, every judgment turned to me. I opened my mouth to give the usual vague, unsatisfying answer. But before I could speak, a man stepped from the shadows near the doorway. Agent Harris was dressed in a discreet suit, but he moved with an electric urgency that seized the room's attention. He stopped, ignored my stunned family, and looked only at me. He executed a crisp, formal salute. "Ma'am," he said, his tone clear and urgent. "Callsign Echo. Operation Nightfall is compromised. Hostage protocol is active. You're needed at the TOC immediately." But the silence that followed, the pure, unadulterated shock on my mother's face, that didn't truly begin there. It began 2 weeks earlier, at a planning meeting that was supposed to be a celebration. We were organizing the 40th anniversary party for my parents. My father, David, a retired executive who valued status above all, was going over the final arrangements. My brother Mark, the family's golden boy and a mid-level VP at a regional bank, was bragging about the venue's security. Having reviewed the plans they'd so proudly circulated, I saw a glaring flaw. A critical vulnerability in the guest access protocol that a child could exploit. I tried to point it out, quietly, professionally, but my father just chuckled dismissively. "Maya, honey, leave the logistics to your brother. Mark handles multi-million-dollar accounts. I think he can handle a party." I felt the familiar cold weight settle in my stomach. It was the same feeling I got when Mark's promotion was celebrated with a new Rolex, while my passing the Foreign Service exam was met with a polite, "Oh, that's nice, dear." Mark just winked at our mother, a shared look of condescending amusement. "It's fine, Maya," he said, his voice dripping with false patience. "The venue has a guy at the door. It's not like we're protecting state secrets." A small, bitter smile touched my lips, but they didn't see it. They never did. They just saw the quiet daughter, the disappointing one with the hobby for a career. He chuckled, thinking it was just another joke at Mighty Maya's expense. He had no idea he'd just dismissed a security protocol I designed for the State Department. To understand the reckoning that followed, you have to understand the two lives I was living. To my family, I existed in a world defined by what I lacked. It was a world of noisy restaurants, clinking champagne glasses, and benchmarks I never seemed to meet. I remember the night my brother Mark was promoted to senior vice president. My father raised a glass, his voice thick with emotion as he toasted his son, his heir. The word hung in the air, a declaration that the family legacy was secure in Mark's capable, predictable hands. Everyone applauded, their faces glowing with pride. It was a perfect family portrait, and I was the smudge at the edge of the frame, always present but never quite in focus. Later that evening, feeling a small, foolish flicker of hope, I tried to share my own news. I mentioned that I'd finally completed a grueling, year-long advanced certification at Quantico, a program with a brutal attrition rate. My mother, Anne, gave me a polite, vacant smile. "Oh, that's lovely, dear," she said, her attention already drifting back to the star of the show. "Another certificate for your wall. Did you see the beautiful watch we got, Mark? Engraved, of course." In that moment, the watch wasn't just a watch. It was the down payment on the condo they helped him with, the car they co-signed for, the endless stream of encouragement that had flowed in his direction his entire life. For me, there was only the condescending childhood nickname they'd resurrect whenever I tried too hard. "Still trying to be Mighty Maya," Mark teased, and they all laughed. I just smiled, a hollow, practiced expression I had perfected over 2 decades. Then there was my other world, my real world. This world was silent, cold, and lived under the hum of servers in a room with no windows. A place officially known as a sensitive compartmented information facility. Here, I wasn't Maya, the disappointing daughter. I was Echo, the lead analyst for a time-sensitive counter-terrorism operation. Here, The only thing that mattered was being right. The stakes weren't a missed promotion. They were lives on a screen, flickering between safety and catastrophe. I remember one night, the air thick with tension, two senior agents shouting over each other about a developing situation, their conflicting strategies threatening to paralyze our response. The noise was pointless, dangerous static. That's when the door opened and in walked Director Thorne, a seasoned intelligence chief who saw brilliance where my family saw blank space. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't have to. "Quiet," he said, and the room fell silent. His eyes scanned the chaotic data streams on the main screen before landing on me. "What does Echo's threat matrix say?" he asked. All eyes turned to me. I took a breath and laid it out, my voice calm and steady. "We have a SIGINT intercept that puts the asset in the red zone," I began, the jargon flowing like a native language. "But both of their proposed exfiltration routes are compromised. I need ISR coverage on these 3 grid coordinates now. We can use a drone on station to create a diversionary pass, drawing their attention west while our team moves in from the southeast. It's a lower probability of direct engagement." There was a moment of silence as everyone processed the third, non-obvious option. The 2 senior agents looked at the map, their faces shifting from agitation to grudging comprehension. Director Thorne just nodded, his expression unreadable but his confidence absolute. "Go with Echo's plan," he said. "It's solid." That was it. No applause, no champagne, no engraved watch, just a quiet, profound respect. That felt more valuable than anything my family could ever offer. It was a respect earned in silence, through competence alone. The 2 worlds couldn't have been more different, and the strain of navigating both was becoming immense. The enabling glue holding it all together was my father. He cornered me in the kitchen a few days after Mark's party, his face a mask of paternal concern. "You know how your mother is," he started, the familiar opening to a dozen similar conversations. "She just worries. Mark's life is just easier to explain at the golf club. This classified stuff sounds like you're hiding something." He placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Why don't you just tell her you work in HR? It would make things so much smoother for everyone." HR. He wanted me to reduce my entire life. The sleepless nights, the immense pressure, the lives I fought to protect from the shadows, to a simple, palatable lie. He wanted me to erase myself so he could have an easier time with his friends. I looked at him, at the man who was supposed to be my biggest champion, and I felt nothing but a vast cold distance. He didn't want to understand my world. He wanted me to pretend it didn't exist. For years I had tried to speak their language of promotions and bonuses, but they only respected one thing: visible power. So when my mother decided her anniversary party was the stage for my public humiliation, I decided to let the rules of my world provide the script. After my father suggested I reduce my life to a lie, something inside me went quiet. The familiar sting of being dismissed was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Their ignorance was no longer just a source of personal pain. It had become a genuine liability. I thought of our distant relative, a federal judge, who had confirmed he would be at the anniversary party. I also thought of the low-level chatter my division had flagged concerning him. Nothing serious enough for a full-time detail, but more than enough to make Mark's guy at the door a dangerously inadequate joke. Arguing with them would be pointless, like trying to explain calculus to a child. So I stopped trying to talk to them. I decided to communicate in the only language the system understands: procedure. That night, I sat down at my encrypted terminal. This wasn't Maya, the frustrated daughter, lashing out. This was Echo, the senior analyst, neutralizing a threat. My fingers moved deliberately across the keyboard as I drafted a formal situational awareness brief. I cited the specific risks, the location, the asset in attendance, and the substandard security protocols on site. I addressed it to the U.S. Marshal Service, knowing exactly which internal triggers it would activate. This wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about forcing a correction. I was tired of living in their chaotic emotional world, so I was simply extending the logic and order of my own to cover it. The system I served would do the work for me. As I expected, The brief was kicked to a hostage rescue and protective detail unit within hours. The agent assigned to run the discreet protective detail was a familiar name. Agent Harris. A good man I'd worked with before who held my professional judgment in high esteem. I sent him a single encrypted message through official channels. Event at 2100 Oak Lane, it read. My presence is covert civilian. You do not acknowledge me unless a Tier 1 contingency is declared. Your contact trigger is code word, nightfall. I hit send, and the trap was set. It was clean, methodical, and irreversible. My family prepared their speeches for my intervention, dripping with condescending concern. They had no idea they were walking into a federally monitored location. They thought they were in their house, under their rules. In reality, they were in my operational theater, and my protocols were already in play. The air in the dining room was thick enough to suffocate. It was the 40th anniversary dinner, but it felt more like a tribunal. My extended family sat around the table, their gazes shifting between me and my mother, a silent jury awaiting the prosecution's final summation. My brother, Mark, leaned back in his chair with a barely concealed smirk, a look of smug victory on his face. He thought this was it. The night the family would finally force me to admit my life was the failure they'd all decided it was. I could see Agent Harris from the corner of my eye, standing discreetly by the entrance, a ghost of my real life haunting the edges of this family drama. He was invisible to them, just part of the background. My mother, Anne, cleared her throat, tapping her glass for attention she already commanded completely. She arranged her face into a mask of loving concern, a look more terrifying than any open hostility. Maya, she began, her voice soft and heavy with false sorrow. We all love you, you know that. But we are worried. I felt my spine stiffen. I'd heard this speech before, in a dozen different forms, over 2 decades. It was the speech about my unusual college thesis, the one about my refusal to take, the corporate job my father arranged, the one about my lack of a suitable partner. It was always about how I was a problem to be solved. This vague, dead-end job, this secrecy. It's not normal, honey. It's time you showed this family some respect and told us the truth. She leaned forward, her eyes boring into me, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper for the killing blow. It's time you explained yourself. As her words hung in the air, a tiny crackle of static broke the spell. It was almost inaudible, but I heard it. Agent Harris's comms. I saw his posture shift, a subtle, almost imperceptible tightening. He was no longer just an observer. A real-world priority alert, something to do with a separate, escalating situation, had just come through. He knew his trigger word, and he looked at me, his eyes asking a single, silent question. This was my moment of choice. I could endure the humiliation, give them another vague answer, and let the charade continue. Or I could burn it all to the ground. For years I had absorbed their judgment in silence. Tonight their court was in session, but they were about to find out it was being held in my jurisdiction. I gave him a barely perceptible nod. The contingency was now active. The fork clattered. My mother, seeing my silence as defiance, slammed her hand on the table. Explain yourself, Maya, she demanded, her voice cracking with fury. And that's when Agent Harris moved. He strode forward, his entire demeanor shifting from quiet professional to field agent on a mission. He bypassed my father, ignored my mother, and stopped directly at my side. He saluted, a gesture so crisp and alien in this domestic setting that it seemed to suck the very air out of the room. His voice cut through the silence like shattering glass. Ma'am, Callsign Echo, Operation Nightfall is compromised, hostage protocol is active, you're needed at the TOC immediately. The words just hung there. Hostage protocol. Callsign Echo. They were terms from a different universe, a language of consequence, and danger that had no place next to my mother's floral centerpiece. I watched as 20 years of their carefully constructed narrative about me crumbled to dust in less than 10 seconds. My father's face went pale, a sickly, ashen gray. Mark's smug expression dissolved into a slack-jawed caricature of disbelief. He looked like a child who had just seen his favorite cartoon character step out of the television. And my mother just stared, her mouth agape, the attack dying on her lips as her reality fractured right in front of her. In that moment, the timid, disappointing daughter they knew simply ceased to exist. I was no longer Maya. I was Echo. I stood, my movements economical and precise, and turned to Harris. My voice was calm, authoritative, and utterly devoid of the person I had been just moments before. "Status of the primary asset, Harris?" I asked. His response was equally professional. "Secure, ma'am." "But the secondary team is pinned down." I nodded once. "Brief me in the car." Then I turned and walked toward the door without a backward glance, leaving them frozen. In the ruins of their own making, a family portrait shattered beyond any hope of repair. My mother had demanded I explain myself. In the end, it only took 3 words, "Callsign Echo, ma'am," for her to realize she never knew me at all. As the car door shut, the chaos of my family's dining room was sealed away like a bad memory. The world of floral centerpieces and wounded pride vanished, replaced by the calm, focused urgency of my real life. Agent Harris was already briefing me, his voice a steady stream of tactical data. My mind shifted instantly, the emotional turmoil of the past hour compartmentalized and filed away. For the next 12 hours, I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was Echo. And there were 3 lives that depended entirely on the decisions I was about to make. While my family was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered worldview, I was coordinating the operation that would bring every one of those people home safely. I heard later that the party never really started. The federal judge, a man who understood protocol and discretion, quietly excused himself. The rest of the family, bewildered and speechless, simply left. My parents and brother were left alone in the silent, cavernous house, surrounded by uneaten food and a truth they could no longer ignore. But all of that was just a distant echo to me, a story from another life. 6 months passed. The silence from my family was absolute. In that time I thrived. My world, once a secret held in the shadows, became my only reality. The culmination of this shift happened on a crisp autumn afternoon at Langley. I stood on a small stage in a formal auditorium, Director Thorne standing before me. He spoke about Operation Nightfall, about leadership under pressure, and about the intelligence that prevented a catastrophe. Then he pinned the intelligence star to my jacket, the weight of it both heavy and profoundly liberating. The applause that followed wasn't the loud, performative clapping I was used to from family gatherings. It was the quiet, genuine respect of my peers, my team, Agent Harris, the people who had been in the trenches with me. They were my real family now, a family forged not by blood, but by competence and mutual trust. My new life took shape quickly after that. I was promoted to section chief, leading a new counterintelligence task force. My office had my name on the door and a window that overlooked the city, a view I had earned. My days were filled with briefings and complex problem solving, surrounded by people who listened. When I spoke, who valued my analysis not because they had to, but because it was sound. This world, once my secret escape, was now my home. It was a world built on merit, where your worth was measured by your actions, not by how easily you could be explained at a golf club. There was a simple, clean honesty to it that I had craved my entire life. One Tuesday morning, an email appeared in my inbox. The sender was my father. The subject line was just my name, Maya. For a long moment, I just stared at it, a ghost from a past I had already buried. A faint, residual flicker of old pain surfaced, the muscle memory of a lifetime of disappointment. But it was weak, distant. With a steady hand, I opened it. "We were wrong," it read, "about everything. Your mother and I, we don't expect forgiveness, we just hope you are safe." I read the words, and I felt nothing, not anger, not vindication, not even pity. It was like reading an apology addressed to a person who no longer existed. He was writing to Mighty Maya, the girl who just wanted their approval. But that girl was gone. Echo had taken her place. My peace was no longer a fragile thing dependent on their validation. It was something I had built myself, forged in silence and reinforced with every successful mission, every life saved. I looked at his message one last time, then moved my cursor. I didn't delete it. I simply archived it. Acknowledged, but not engaged. My gaze drifted from the screen to the tactical map of our current operation, my focus already shifting to the next mission, the next problem to solve. My past was a closed file. My future was waiting. My entire life, they told me to be someone they could be proud of. In the end, I had to leave them behind to become someone I could be proud of myself. If you've ever had to build your own legacy in the face of disbelief, share your story below. In this community, your quiet expertise is always recognized.